The evolution of Ariana Grande's style. When a celebrity has been in the public eye for a long time, one of the easiest ways to chart the progression of their career is by examining their clothing choices, which are often directly influenced by their professional and personal lives. Musicians are one of the best examples of this fashion phenomenon, adopting a new look to tie into whatever direction their latest project has gone in. And in today's social media-driven world, some would argue that the visuals have to be just as strong as the music itself. Ariana Grande is without a doubt one of the biggest pop stars in the world, and like many other musicians, she's adopted a bunch of different looks over the years in order to keep her fandom entertained and her name in the headlines. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the evolution of Ariana Grande's style over the course of her career, from her kid-friendly Nickelodeon days, to her signature pop star ponytail, to her wicked method dressing. And we'll be discussing how these numerous outfits relate to her creative endeavors, public persona, and cultural legacy. Let's get into it. Born on June 26, 1993, Ariana Grande Butera was raised in Boca Raton, Florida, where she began performing at a very young age, being cast in local stage productions that included Annie, The Wizard of Oz, and Beauty and the Beast. Her passion for musical theater only grew from there, and when she was 14 years old, she made her Broadway debut as Charlotte in 13. In 2008, Ariana and her family moved to Los Angeles, and after a series of auditions and callbacks, she was officially cast as Cat Valentine in the Nickelodeon sitcom Victorious, where she was reunited with her fellow 13 co-star, Liz Gillies. At the time, the Disney Channel was bringing in billions of dollars annually thanks to the worldwide success of Camp Rock, Hannah Montana, and High School Musical. And as their biggest competitor, Nickelodeon was on the hunt for their own music-driven franchise they could market to the masses. This resulted in the creation of shows like Big Time Rush, The Naked Brothers Band, and of course, Victorious. The show premiered on March 27, 2010, and took place at a performing arts high school where the students routinely burst into song and dance numbers alongside an absolutely unhinged laugh track. Victorious was a smash hit with Nickelodeon's target audience, and although the show was centered around Victoria Justice's character Tori, the supporting cast quickly became fan favorites, with Ariana's ditzy depiction of Cat being cited as one of the series' highlights. For the role, Ariana's black hair was bleached and dyed bright red every other week, resulting in a good deal of damage that destroyed her natural curl pattern. Because she wasn't wearing a wig that she could just take off whenever the director yelled cut, she had no choice but to embrace the red hair in her day-to-day life. But thankfully, it was a pretty good time to be colorful, especially if you were in the music industry. Besides Nicki Minaj, Katy Perry, and Lady Gaga sporting some pretty wild do's, red hair itself was on trend thanks to the likes of Hayley Williams and Rihanna. And I'd even argue that the color added a unique edge to Ariana's look that helped her stand out in the tween space. It's also interesting to note how even back then, her hair was a key part of her personal brand, something that we've seen continue over the course of her career. Despite the show's popularity, Victorious didn't exactly make Ariana Grande a household name, so her few appearances in those early days were usually at C-list industry events, and you could get a pretty good idea of her level of celebrity at that point in time based on her outfits alone, frequently wearing platform heels, rompers, and bodycon dresses that resulted in a generically trendy look that could be replicated by just about anyone. She wasn't really exploring her personal style yet, just going through the motions of what was expected of someone with an iota of fame. Although I wouldn't call her outfits from this time period outright sexy, they don't necessarily scream, "I'm 16." But I don't blame her for trying to dress more maturely, considering most people in the industry probably thought of her as nothing more than that redhead from that kids show. Her everyday outfits also highlighted the different expectations that Nickelodeon and Disney had of their young stars, with Ariana's outfits being way less conservative than similarly aged sitcom stars like Bridget Mendler and Debbie Ryan. On December 12, 2011, Ariana released her debut single, Put Your Hearts Up, a bubblegum pop record with an inspiring message that was designed to appeal to her Nickelodeon fanbase. The outfits she wore while promoting the single were heavily stylized with cutesy patterns, soft pastels, flared skirts, sweetheart necklines, and two-piece sets, all of which tied into the song's retro vibes. Although she was still sporting Cat's signature red hair, she experimented with different hairstyles like curls and updos, which were often accessorized with bows, once again highlighting the juvenile direction of the song. Even her makeup was different than it had been a few years earlier, getting rid of the smoky pop-punk eyeliner in favor of a more classic pinup model look with thick lashes and the occasional red lip. Her clothing took a lot of inspiration from the 1950s, but whether it was because of the fit, print, or color, they often wound up looking cheap and costumey, making the whole project come across as inauthentic. And I feel like you can even tell that she didn't feel comfortable with what she was wearing. For the most part, she stuck to this retro look, but on rare occasions she was spotted in boho styles that included maxi dresses, gladiator sandals, and flowy fabrics. And while it didn't really match everything else going on, at least she looked comfortable. At the time, Ariana was being styled by Bridget Pila, who was also the costume designer for Victorious, and as a result, there was a good deal of overlap between her and her on-screen counterpart visually. When the first season aired in 2010, the character opted for graphic tees, skinny jeans, neon colors, and arm warmers, but as the show progressed, Kat began wearing cardigans, cupcake dresses, and hair bows, which were symbolic of her new lobotomized personality, effectively turning her into a caricature of herself that behaved like a toddler. The fact that Ariana was dressed so similarly to her character was one of the signs that she didn't have a lot of control over her image at that point in time, and in more recent years, she's denounced Put Your Hearts Up altogether.
Anything I wore between 2008 and 2011.
In 2012, Nickelodeon officially announced their plans to cancel Victorious, shocking fans of the series. But unlike the rest of her castmates, Ariana wasn't free of the network's clutches. On June 8, 2013, Sam and Kat began airing, which paired up Sam Puckett from iCarly and Kat Valentine from Victorious, with the characters becoming roommates and starting their own babysitting business, making it Two Broke Girls, but for kids. Because she was still playing the same character, Ariana continued to dye her hair red, but it soon reached its literal breaking point, and in order to give her scalp a break, she began wearing wigs while filming instead. Why that wasn't an option earlier, I don't know. Besides the years of bleach and hair dye causing serious damage, I also wonder if Ariana was sick of Kat holding her back professionally, and we could interpret her refusal to continue dyeing her hair as a sign that she was finally ready to move on. Ariana had been working on her debut album since 2010, but after her less than pleasant experience with Put Your Hearts Up, she called up her record label and told them changes needed to be made, resulting in delays. Released on August 30th, 2013, Yours Truly had elements of 1990s R&B with a dash of 1950s doo-wop. While critics found the lyricism a touch juvenile, Ariana's vocals were praised, even drawing comparisons to Mariah Carey, and The Way, featuring Mac Miller, wound up becoming her first song to enter Billboard's top 10. There tends to be a lot of pushback from the public when young celebrities begin to transition into adulthood, but Ariana wound up relatively unscathed, at least in comparison to, say, Miley Cyrus or Christina Aguilera. The reason for this likely had to do with 1. Ariana's level of fame, and 2. the way she dressed. Unless you were an avid Victorious viewer, odds are you'd never heard of Ariana Grande prior to the release of Yours Truly, so she didn't have as high a hurdle to jump when it came to changing the public's pre-existing idea of her. Most celebrities have a habit of going all in on sex appeal when transitioning into more adult projects, which can be rather jarring when you've been watching them since they were kids. But Ariana went in a different direction when it came to displaying her maturity. Because of the album's 1950s influences, her outfits continued to have vintage inspirations, but it looked a lot more polished and put together than it had previously, with the longer skirts and timeless patterns coming across as more chic than costumey. I also think the T-length dresses managed to make her look a lot taller than she actually was, which is no small feat, considering she's barely 5 foot. I really loved her street style during this era, which was cute without being outright childish, a balance that she really struggled with back in 2012. All of the statement coats, ruffled blouses, and nude colors came straight out of We Heart It, highlighting how her intended fanbase was no longer children, but people her own age, something that was also reflected in her media coverage, with Ariana beginning to appear in more recognizable magazines like Teen Vogue, 17, and Cosmopolitan. Rockabilly and twee aesthetics were pretty popular in general around this time period, with several celebrities being spotted in similar outfits throughout the early 2010s, signifying how Ariana was still following trends, not setting them. For performances, she switched between 2 styles. The first was a simple skater skirt crop top combo, a look that practically defined the early 2010s. And while it was vaguely reminiscent of the silhouette she wore at events, helping create a unified aesthetic, it did feel a bit basic, coming across as more Instagram influencer than pop star. Although that's not necessarily a bad thing when it comes to growing a fan base. Her other performance looks featured a bedazzled bustier and a layered tutu. And while a bit more fun than the other option, it always reminded me of what Selena Gomez had worn during her tour a few years earlier, making Ariana's attire come across as a bit dated. You'll also notice that these performance outfits don't show much skin, a conscious choice on her part in order to not alienate her young, pre-existing fanbase, or more importantly, their parents. The biggest change visually was her hair, which she dyed a light brown color, creating a more approachable, down-to-earth vibe that tied into the sweet and girly aesthetics of the entire Yours Truly era. Whether she was performing, walking the red carpet, or out with friends, you were guaranteed to see her with this curly half-up, half-down do, which she explained was one of the only hairstyles she actually felt comfortable wearing that didn't cause further damage to her hair. I personally thought that it was adorable. In early 2014, Ariana began working on her next album, but this time around, she had a lot more say on its creative direction, and insisted on more of the hip-hop elements she'd experimented with on Yours Truly. My Everything was released on August 22, 2014, and became one of the biggest albums of the year, with Problem, Break Free, Bang Bang, Love Me Harder, and One Last Time being near inescapable if you were at the club, which is pretty fitting considering Ariana had just turned 21. Compared to Yours Truly, My Everything had a more mature tone, which was similarly reflected in Ariana's outfits. She began wearing more figure-hugging silhouettes with lace and leather details, which historically have provocative connotations, an idea that was aided by her penchant for black, white, gray, and red, colors that were significantly less playful than her pastels the year prior. Her makeup became a touch more sultry, with a dramatic cat eye and dark lipstick. She also lost the bouncy curls, but kept the half-up do, with the ponytail section starting to move a little higher on her head, foreshadowing what was to come. Another new addition to her look were cat ear headbands, which quickly trickled into the mainstream. And while they were probably meant to give sex kitten vibes, I always thought it looked like a little kid playing dress-up. I'm not saying they weren't memorable, but they didn't really tie into the album's imagery as a whole, and there were definitely outfits that I think would have benefited from not having cat ears attached to them. Once again, she went in two different directions for performances. Some of her outfits took inspiration from the 1960s, specifically the mod and space age styles with vinyl, A-line dresses, knee-high boots, and metallics. The other style was more risque, featuring either a bodysuit or a bustier and micro shorts, both with a ruffled peplum accent. It was the 2010s after all. These looks were clearly intended to resemble lingerie, and this push for sex appeal was further evidenced by her performance at the 2014 Victoria's Secret fashion show, confirming that she was no longer just for kids. Both of these styles were incredibly different from her previous era, showing how much she had grown as both an artist and as a woman. In 2015, she had a recurring role on Scream Queens, and although she was a fairly minor character, she was featured prominently in advertising, something you can credit to her overall popularity, with her star power being one of the best marketing tools the show had at their disposal. Much like when she played Kat on Victorious, Ariana's personal style rubbed off on her character, Chanel No. 2, with everything from the hair to the clothing looking like they were pulled right out of Ariana's closet. Side note, Ariana is a huge fan of the Chanel brand, wearing their clothing, purses, and shoes numerous times over the course of her career, and I'm genuinely surprised that she hasn't been tapped as an ambassador by now, although maybe that's for the best considering how many heinous looks the brand has put out in recent years. In July 2015, Ariana had her first real scandal after footage of her at a donut shop was leaked to the press. In the video, Ariana is seen licking several donuts that were left on the counter, which is definitely a gross thing to do if you have no intention of buying them. And after the incident became public, the shop's health rating was reduced from an A to a B, which can be really detrimental to a small business. Now, there's no denying that this was obnoxious behavior, but what actually made this incident a nationwide talking point was the fact that Ariana muttered, "I hate Americans, I hate America." Keep in mind that just a month earlier, Donald Trump had announced his intentions to run for president with the slogan, "Make America Great Again," and his racist and sexist rhetoric had quickly brought all sort of crazies out of the woodwork. As a result, Ariana's comments were quickly decried as unpatriotic, and she was briefly public enemy number one in the right-wing space. However, what those people completely failed to understand is that she was specifically referring to a tray of desserts that had been shown to her, being more of a criticism of America's unhealthy eating habits than a political statement. While a donut shop is a silly place to be complaining about that sort of thing in the first place, and she was definitely rude about it, I don't think the general sentiment is incorrect. I mean, just look at the ingredients that are legal here and banned everywhere else in the world. But I digress. Ariana eventually wound up apologizing for Donutgate, and the world quickly moved on. At the 2015 AMAs, Ariana teased her next era with a playful performance of her latest single, Focus, with the jazz meets R&B direction seeming like a perfect fit for her stylistically. Unfortunately, she wound up scrapping the song from the album, meaning this was the one and only time we saw her in this sort of burlesque look, which is really a shame because I loved it. And is it just me, or does it remind anyone else of what Sabrina Carpenter has been wearing lately? Ariana's third album, Dangerous Woman, was released on May 20th, 2016, and was easily her most provocative project at that point, with frank discussions about relationships, love, and sex, which were no doubt influenced by the dissolution of her relationship with fellow musician Big Sean the previous year. This album went in more of a pop direction, with several of the songs topping the charts across the world, and it solidified Ariana's place as one of the biggest names in the music biz. A sign that a musician has a well-defined visual identity is how replicable and recognizable their look is. Just think about it. Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley, Cher, Prince, Madonna, Britney Spears, Amy Winehouse. You could dress up as any of them for Halloween, and no one would be confused. Ariana's brand recognition and development wasn't quite at that level yet, which is pretty surprising considering her level of fame. It was around this time that she finally brought a real stylist onto her team, Law Roach, who back in those days was still relatively unheard of, with Zendaya and Celine Dion being his biggest clients, who in 2016 weren't exactly at the height of their careers. Law often refers to himself as an image architect, meaning he helps construct a look that not only makes a celebrity more recognizable, but creates a specific message that ties into their public persona. From the very beginning, he made it clear that he never wanted it to look like Ariana was trying to outgrow her fandom. He just elevated her pre-existing style staples to make her more of a trendsetter instead of a trend follower. When Ariana and Law first began working together, there were some pretty obvious growing pains, with the two being unable to decide if they should go in a boss bitch, old Hollywood, or urban casual direction, resulting in a somewhat messy combination of power suits, floor-length gowns, and Letterman jackets. Although they experimented with the occasional space bun or Dutch braid, they eventually settled on a long and luscious ponytail as her signature hairstyle, and it quickly became one of her most recognizable style elements, even appearing on the Dangerous Woman album cover, which, side note, I don't really love because it's so obvious that she took the photographs during her animal ears phase, but by the time the album had come out, she wasn't wearing them anymore. For a brief period of time, they tested out bangs, which I actually loved, since it gave her a sort of quirky, nerdy edge that was mirrored in her clothing, which combined masculine and feminine elements and felt like they were finally starting to understand what they wanted to do with her style. For the Dangerous Woman tour in 2017, Law Roach enlisted the help of fashion designer Brian Hearns, who took inspiration from hip-hop groups of the 90s and 2000s for Ariana's performance attire. He combined oversized elements like cargo pants and hoodies with more feminine crop tops and chokers, creating a powerful image that mirrored the unapologetic message of the album. On May 22, 2017, a terrorist attack occurred at Manchester Arena following one of Ariana's concerts, killing 22 people and injuring over 1,000. She briefly paused her tour and held a benefit concert with dozens of guest musicians, raising £17 million for the victims of the bombing. Experiencing PTSD after the incident, Ariana began wearing what I'd refer to as her comfort clothing, a style that we'd seen her in sporadically over the years, which included oversized sweatshirts and uber high heels. Once the Dangerous Woman tour reached its conclusion, Ariana took some time for herself, and after several months she re-emerged with platinum blonde hair. She continued to wear the short hemlines and knee-high boots of prior eras, but in more neutral shades, and even though it was a subtle difference, it was a nice change of pace, a sentiment that seemed to be shared by the vast majority of the public, with her glammed-down British Vogue cover shoot going viral. In May 2018, she made her first appearance at the annual Met Gala, wearing a custom Vera Wang gown inspired by the Sistine Chapel, which was a perfect fit for the Heavenly Bodies theme, and it's since become one of her most memorable looks to date. My favorite thing about the outfit was how it incorporated elements she'd been known for in the past, like bows, sweetheart necklines, and her ponytail, but they were reinterpreted in an interesting way. On August 17, 2018, she released her next album, Sweetener, which had an empowering message focused on perseverance and positivity. The album was notable for including a track about Ariana's partner at the time, comedian Pete Davidson. The two had begun dating in May of that year, and the wacky pairing had quickly become one of the most talked about celebrity couplings, and the paparazzi simply couldn't get enough of them, which I think Ariana enjoyed, being spotted out in public way more often than she had in the past. Although it seemed like she was initially planning to head in a new direction for the sweetener era, she wound up bringing back the brown hair and the comfy outfits, which paired remarkably well with Pete's eccentric streetwear, and her thick eyeliner, ponytail, hoodies, and boots became such a staple of her look that no Ariana Grande parody was complete without them. Ariana had gotten her first tattoo back when she was 18, and in the years that followed she gotten a few more, but in 2018 alone she got over a dozen. Pete Davidson was known for having a rather impressive amount of tattoos, and Ariana's sudden increase in ink seemed to be a reflection of their relationship dynamic, even getting several tattoos that were directly related to their romance, which tattoo artists always warn people against getting, and for good reason, as I'm sure both Ariana and Pete can attest to. With God is a Woman and No Tears Left to Cry being smash hits, the Sweetener era started off with a bang. But only a month after the album was released, Ariana's ex-boyfriend, Mac Miller, passed from a drug overdose, and the shocking incident led to her retreating from the public eye and putting a pause on the album's promotion. On February 8, 2019, only 6 months after the release of Sweetener, Ariana released her next project, Thank You Next. The album was inspired by the various hardships she had experienced in the past 2 years, including the Manchester bombing, Mac Miller's death, and the end of her engagement to Pete Davidson. The album was a critical and commercial success, with each of its 12 tracks entering Billboard's Hot 100, and it's by far my favorite of all her releases. The album was incredibly personal, including direct references to Ariana's relationships, fandom, and public image. While she was already known for having a decent sense of humor, Thank You Next was Ariana's first musical project that allowed her comedy chops to shine, as evidenced by the titular music video, which featured references to her favorite movies and appearances by different celebrities, including her victorious co-stars, creating a fun full-circle moment. Thank You Next made it abundantly clear that Ariana was aware of what the public had been saying about her, but that she didn't really care. That was pretty obvious in her clothing choices as well, with Ariana continuing to wear the same ponytail, boots, and hoodies combo as the years prior, regardless of her fans' complaints about it being boring and played out. Throughout 2019, Ariana went on tour to promote Sweetener and Thank You Next, wearing several designs by Versace that were styled by La Roche. Combining futuristic elements with streetwear, these were some of her most experimental performance outfits to date, but there were some key elements that stayed true to the stereotypical Ariana look. It was during this time period that Ariana began to draw criticism for cultural appropriation. Now, regardless of what stan accounts on Twitter say, I think it's fair to assume that Ariana took more than musical inspiration from the Black community. Besides the drastic change in her skin color, which absolutely no amount of sunshine could have accomplished, she also had a habit of speaking in African American vernacular. Now, I do think people can be influenced by their environment, and considering Ariana had been collaborating with Black artists for multiple years, it's not a total surprise that she picked up some slang here and there, but there were definitely times where it felt forced and unnatural, hence the cultural appropriation criticism. Dozens of celebrities were appropriating Black culture in the 2010s, like Miley Cyrus, Bad Baby, Iggy Azalea, and Kylie Jenner. So Blackiana, as this time period in Ariana's life is referred to, was certainly indicative of a larger problem within the entertainment industry, namely, the acceptance of Black aesthetics only when it's a costume for white women. Now, one thing that's often overlooked during discussions of Ariana's style is that she wasn't solely responsible for it, and La Roche even directly came to her defense to say that he was the one pulling references from his own culture. I'm not saying Ariana is totally innocent of any blame. After all, she was a grown adult, but if she was surrounded by people who were telling her, "You should dress like this," it's possible she didn't realize that it was an issue. In 2020, the world came to a standstill, but Ariana kept working, and on October 30th, she released her 6th studio album, Positions. The album had a happier tone than her last few releases, with a strong message of female empowerment, as well as cheeky wordplay that alluded to her sex life. As iconic as Ariana's signature look was, after half a decade, the novelty was long gone, and she was in desperate need of an image overhaul for this new project, which we finally got thanks to Mimi Cottrell, who replaced La Roche as Ariana's stylist. For Positions, Mimi brought back some of the 1950s and 60s influences we'd seen in Ariana's early days, but in a more elegant and refined way with beehive hairdos, pillbox hats, capes, and suit sets. While there's no denying that Ariana's style had been influential, as evidenced by her numerous doppelgangers, she wasn't exactly considered a high-fashion girly. But in 2021, she and her team started making a conscious effort to change that narrative. She started wearing a bunch of popular brands like Mire, Miss Sohi, Miu Miu, Mugler, Courrèges, and Jean Paul Gaultier, and leaned into other trends like gloves, cutouts, bows, and blazers. They also got rid of her foot-long extensions and played around with more natural hairstyles, making her feel like a real person instead of a product. For most of her career, Ariana's style had stuck to the same basic formula, making her look the same at 27 as she did at 21, and these style changes finally made her look her age. Her new look was best exemplified by the custom Vera Wang dress she wore to her wedding in May, which was sleek, simple, and just a bit sexy. In September, she joined the 21st season of The Voice and continued to stun in outfits that were polished but still fun. And they're some of my favorite looks of hers, like I'm never going to get over the Versace dress from 13 going on 30. In November, Ariana launched r.e.m. Beauty, making her one in a long line of celebrities who decided to get into cosmetics, which I actually found surprising since hair was a bigger part of her brand image. The name of the brand was taken from the song on her Sweetener album, but otherwise the project was firmly rooted in her 2021 visual aesthetics. She experimented with a lot of unique makeup looks, which tied into the retro-futuristic vibe they were going for, although I wouldn't have minded if they pushed it even further. After all, everyone loved Euphoria. Part of me wonders if r.e.m.'s launch was delayed, because its vibes feel like a perfect fit for the 1960s Physicians era, but by the time it came out, Ariana was already moving on to greener pastures. It was around this time that Ariana once again received criticisms of cultural appropriation, this time from the Asian community, who suggested that her darker hair, lighter skin, and general styling were an attempt to make her look more Asian, leading to the meme, arigato grande. Now, K-pop had fully entered the mainstream at this point, so East Asian visuals were beginning to pop up more frequently in general. But apart from her makeup, there wasn't much that pointed to Ariana attempting to Asian fish. Personally, I think Nicki Minaj, Gwen Stefani, and Katy Perry were a lot more egregious with their adoption of Asian aesthetics. Now I'll be the first to say that her outfits in 2021 didn't really scream Ariana Grande. They were just generically fashionable looks that any popular celebrity would have been wearing at the time. But I think that was probably the point, since she was also auditioning for Wicked, a project she'd been in love with since she was a child. And because she wanted to be seen as an actress, not a pop star, distancing herself from her public persona was the best way to do that. After several rounds of auditions, she was officially cast as Glinda, and in 2022, filming commenced in the UK. Once again, Ariana dyed her hair for a role, going blonde to fully embody the character, which I personally found quite shocking, since she'd spent so many years trying to get her hair healthy again. Because of her busy filming schedule, we didn't see much of Ariana for several months, but in 2023, her personal life became the topic of conversation. In February, she separated from her husband, and a few months later, news broke that she and her Wicked co-star, Ethan Slater, had begun dating. The timeline of said relationship caused quite a stir, as Ethan was married when he and Ariana met on set, and he'd recently become a parent. Now, this wasn't the first time Ariana had been accused of being a homewrecker, with Naya Rivera alleging in her autobiography that in 2014 her then-fiancé, Big Sean, had left her for Ariana. And Ariana herself has poked fun at these cheating rumors in her discography, like the song Break Up With Your Boyfriend, I'm Bored. Ariana didn't bother commenting on this controversy, but her clothing choices on the rare occasions she was spotted out and about said a lot. Although she had incorporated sportswear elements into her clothing for the better part of a decade, in 2023 it got a lot preppier and posher. This change might have been because of where she'd been living for the past year, but I also think that these outfits were intended to make her look sweet and innocent, like someone who couldn't possibly steal another woman's husband. On March 8, 2024, she released her 7th album, Eternal Sunshine, which highlighted the two different sides of Ariana, the vulnerable one she kept hidden from the world, and the happy-go-lucky facade she put on to entertain the public. And some critics even interpreted it as Ariana's way of reflecting on her life as she entered her 30s. The album saw Ariana take a bigger role in the songwriting process, with several of the songs being written by her alone, highlighting how personal the project was. Tying into this idea of self-reflection, her outfits while promoting Eternal Sunshine pulled from her past work, like the hair bows of her Nickelodeon days, the retro vibes of Yours Truly, the mature color palette of My Everything, the distinctive Dangerous Woman ponytail, and the gloves of Positions. Even her iconic cat ears made a return. Despite these elements being extremely familiar to Ariana Grande fans, there was a new life breathed into them, and she exuded a sense of glamour that had been unseen at any other point in her career. This aesthetic difference also related to the album itself, which was unlike any of her past work with synth, dance, and house influences. Multiple artists, including Kesha, Charli XCX, Troye Sivan, and Camila Cabello, were experimenting with these genres around the same time. But because Ariana didn't lean into Y2K style like the rest of them did, she was able to avoid comparisons. Side note, the short flipped-out brown bob she sported in the Boy Is Mine music video is one of my all-time favorite Ariana hairstyles, and I would love it if she fully committed to that sort of look in the future, because it's just so different from anything else we've seen from her. Shortly after the release of Eternal Sunshine, Ariana's attention pivoted to her next big project, Wicked. While musicians have been dressing in outfits inspired by their work for decades, it's only in more recent years that actors have taken to method dressing, with Margot Robbie, Zendaya, and Blake Lively making headlines for their themed looks. While Ariana had sported a handful of Wicked-inspired outfits from the time she was cast, in the months leading up to the film's release, she dialed the method dressing up to 1,000. Most of her outfits paid direct homage to her hyper-feminine character, with Ariana wearing shades of pink, bubbly silhouettes, sparkly fabrics, and flower motifs. On the occasions she wanted to be a little less obvious, they went in a classic glamour direction, with shift and ball gown dresses in shades of black, white, and cream. Once again, these outfits pulled from the 1950s and 60s, with many publications even drawing comparisons to Audrey Hepburn, who was actually one of Ariana's icons. There's no denying that she'd been a superstar for years, but I feel like the Wicked press tour really proved how much pull Ariana had in the fashion industry, wearing custom designs by Vivienne Westwood, Thom Browne, Loewe, and Louis Vuitton. And it just makes me wonder how many more looks they have up their sleeves, because Wicked Part 2 doesn't come out until later this year. Besides her Wicked outfits serving as a great promotional tool for the movie, they also gave Ariana an opportunity to reinvent herself. Historically, Hollywood isn't very welcoming to musicians who suddenly pivot to acting. And regardless of Ariana getting her start on TV, it didn't change the fact that the world saw her as a pop star. If you've been paying attention, then I'm sure you've noticed that since 2020, she'd been getting rid of the visuals that defined Ariana Grande. And by 2024, they were two totally different people. She's blonde, not a brunette. Her hair's in a bun, not a ponytail. She only wears gowns, never hoodies. This brings us back to the cultural appropriation conversation. Back when she was in the music industry, she had no problem profiting off of black aesthetics, but once she wanted to be taken seriously by Hollywood, she went back to being white, an old school type of white, transatlantic accent and all. In recent interviews, Ariana has called her pop star persona a character, and I'd argue that her current behavior is an act as well, one that she no doubt hopes will get her more opportunities as she continues down the movie star path. Too bad it isn't that easy for real women of color. Some musicians make sure that every project is totally different from their last, but Ariana is a creature of habit, and it's clear that she likes what she likes. Her fondness for the 1950s, 1960s, and 1990s has resulted in certain references making numerous appearances, and I'd argue that the Ariana Grande of 2024 isn't that dissimilar to the Ariana Grande of 2014. On one hand, that means she's consistent, but on the other, is she uninspired? Right now, she seems to be firmly in her Wicked era, and I have absolutely no idea what she has in store next. If she decides to focus on acting, which I wouldn't blame her for considering all of the award nominations, I'd love to see her in a classic comedy, like something Goldie Hawn or Dolly Parton used to do. If she happens to be working on another album, I'd love to see something totally out of left field, visually and musically. Maybe jazz? What are your thoughts on Ariana Grande's style evolution? And which celebrity should we take a look at next? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!